Hello, everyone. Megan here from Romance by the Book with the lovely Marielle.
Hello.
And we also have our special guest this month, Eva Leigh. Thank you for being
Hi.
here.
Thank you
She
for
picked
having me.
our book of the month for us, which was Sixpenny Octavo by Annick Trent. And so we're going to talk about it and see what's going on in her world with what she's working on.
Yeah, I was really excited for your pick because I have never read anything from Annick Trent. And then also I really appreciated reading something that was in a slightly different, like historical, but it's not necessarily Regency. And also I find that like very old school romance sometimes had working class people, but recently here, and like recently is probably like the last 10 years or so, that everyone is aristocratic, or for the most part. So it was fun to read, to see that it was going to be something like out of that world. um so yeah, how did you first hear about this book or the author?
Well, I actually was talking to Olivia Waite, the romance author, and she's also the romance columnist for the New York Times currently. And I was like, I wanted to highlight something because I knew this was coming up, and I wanted to highlight a book that maybe wasn't um, that was indie and that was historical and that was different, from what a lot of the historical landscape has been looking like. I mean, my books are no exception. I mean, there may be a working class character, but at least one of the other characters is from an aristocratic or genteel family or something like that. So she suggested this book, Sixpenny Octavo by Annick Trent, and I was so intrigued by this concept of like it was sapphic and historical, and that it was characters who were, it was an era that was a little different than what we had been reading about a lot in the traditional published landscape, and also the working class characters. All of these things seemed so intriguing to me that I really wanted to give it a look. And I read it and I loved it. I was charmed by the writing and the characters. And so I thought this would be a really great book for to bring to the larger public, so that I obviously wouldn't flatter myself in thinking that like I'm going to make this book a success. I mean, it's
Right.
it's probably doing fine on its own, but I just like I like shiny, like bringing people to the fore, and so I thought this would be a really nice book to explore all of the things that I just talked about, as far as something different for historical romance.
Yeah, I mean, that was really, I think, great for us too, because I think I entered romance through historicals. And while I've read like lots of, starting from old and reading lots now, this still felt like kind of a fresh and different story. Um, and we don't see a whole lot of sapphic um, historicals anyway. Olivia Waite, I think, was the last person actually who was on our who we read on Romance by the Book, who wrote one, and it was
Mm-hmm.
great fun. It was nice to read.
Um,
Um,
yeah, and
yeah,
Adriana Herrera has wrote a sapphic historical
that's true.
recently, which was really great. And it had Latina characters, and I was love that book, love Adriana's writing, and
Mhm.
so I'm glad to see that we're getting more of them out there.
Yeah, and hers takes place in Paris, and also like it's also a little bit in a different. I mean, it's not a different setting, but a little bit like slightly off the beaten path, which is really fun.
Back in my day, when I first started reading romance in the 80s, there was more uh, expansiveness in terms of location, and it
Hmm.
really has gotten much, much more narrow. And so, even something like Paris is different, for historicals. And so, I love seeing, and I trust Olivia, Adriana, and Annick to take us places where we don't often get to go, and do so in a really deft manner.
Yeah.
Um, I was curious about the softness of the book.
I don't really know another way to describe it. Just it was like very soft. It was like very
Mm-hmm.
like kind of comforting, and even the conflicts were not super like drawn out like they can be sometimes, especially in historicals. And I wondered if that was something that drew you to it specifically, or if you felt any kind of way about that.
Well, I didn't know at the onset when I was reading it how soft it was going to be. You know what I mean? I didn't know what the sort of the tone and tenor of the book was. And the stakes are high, as far as like, imprisonment, possibly even execution and things like that. So we have these really high stakes and a very fraught political environment. But at the same time, the interaction between the characters is very soft and sweet and hot, but in a very sort of soft heat, if you will. And then there's also so much about like found family and coming to trust people and letting people in and things like that, which is not the Sturm and Drang that we often get in romance, especially historical romance. So I liked, and then it's sort of like everyone's puttering around kitchens and, making pies or, doing their washing or something like that. And it was just the sort of domestic kind of coziness that was very kind of soothing and comforting, but also with this really beautiful love story going on in the middle of it.
I loved the idea of the book club and how important that became in the story, and to both the main characters and really to all of the side characters as well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I really enjoyed like the friendship between Hannah and Molly and how important they clearly were to each other. And yeah, there was just a lot going on outside of like the main love story that was really fun to read about too.
Mm-hmm. Well, it
Yeah.
was interesting because, like, the jealousy, like, um, the her jealousy is almost like it's more because of the friendship between rather than the actual romantic relationship because it doesn't it has that closeness, that intimacy in a way that Lucy doesn't have. So I really like that kind of twist on it. It's like, oh, it's not like a lover's kind of jealousy. I'm sorry, Marielle, you were about to say something and then
Oh
I
no, you're
spoke.
fine. I think
Mm-hmm.
I actually forgot what I was because my brain does that. Just um I was thinking when I was reading this, I was thinking a bit about Cat Sebastian, and I think if you follow her kind of anywhere on
Mm-hmm.
the internet, she's always saying that like her story has no plot or that there's
Just
like
vibes.
Just fun.
uh-huh. And I thought this story it's not that it has no plot because it has a plot and then the plot is it's in there. It's just that all the things that like could become a problem or that traditionally become like a like capital P like a capital C conflict ends up being like, oh well, we talked about it, it's fine. Or I think even in the beginning when Molly's in jail, um it's it's like, oh, she might be transported to Newgate, this is terrible, but the things that they do like work out, which I think probably was part of the comforting feel to it, is that like, oh well, you do the things, you talk to the lawyer and it worked out, which was which was
Right.
nice. um because there were a few times I think when I was reading that I was expecting for like the other shoe to drop, and it just they just kind of worked their things out and continued on. um Even with the intrigue of like somebody is talking to the oh, why can't I think of words?
Magistrate.
Thank you. Like somebody, we have a mole, someone's talking to the magistrate, and even the way that resolved was like, I think because the community was so close knit and they trusted each other so well that they were able to kind of resolve the issue and like work things out and move forward without it being too much of a hiccup. Like no one felt like they needed to leave town or that they couldn't be be part of that community again. And that was interesting to me, um especially in a romance and in a book that was fairly short. Like it wasn't terribly long. So I'm sorry, my dog is like huffing. I don't know if you can even.
Hey, Bo.
Is it even a Zoom call if a pet is not involved somehow?
Like she comes next to me and is like, and I'm like, what are you doing?
Why are you breathing hard? That's funny.
I wish you could see her staring. She stares. Anyway.
Laser-eyed.
There was going to be a question in there, but now I forgot. Anyway, so it's basically, I just thought it was really interesting and wondered if you gravitate, because there has been, I guess, in the past little bit a conversation about like third act breakups and like if you actually need to have, like whether tension and stakes always has to equal, a third act breakup or like big dramatic moments
Right.
within the story. And I was
Right.
curious what you thought of that.
Well, I have sort of two points to that. Like, I feel that like you were talking about Cat Sebastian, and I had just read We Could Be So Good, which is set in the 1960s, I think, in New York. And in that book, the one of the characters is given a queer romance or a queer story by another character, and he's like, I don't want to read this because they're always sad. I don't want to read another book about queer characters where it's like it's sadness. And I feel like and then they actually wind up reading the book and like, oh, it's not sad. And I've been thinking about that in terms of like writing particularly queer historical romance, that it's like, we'd heard this like, well, the stories are so sad and everybody's so oppressed, and it's like, this is joy, this is happiness, this is like, and I feel like, and sometimes when we kind of de-escalate the conflict, it's sort of a way of sort of demonstrating, to the people who are ignorant about these things, that like, queer love and queer joy have always existed, and these authors like Olivia and Adriana and Annick and are they're showing it, and Kat, that there's like, these are stories of love and joy and happiness, and we can have those too, and they don't have to necessarily end tragically, or that the queerness is the source of the conflict between the characters. It's like, it's a factor that they all have to consider, but it's not the thing that breaks them, or is the major obstacle.
Yeah, that was interesting. That seems to be something that comes up with other marginalized groups too.
Right.
That people fear or / think, and I wonder if that's a little bit of the reason why it's so important to have representation within like the authors too, because you get like a much more nuanced look at the life as a queer person or a person of color, and that you're able to see much more of like the joy, because obviously people with those identities have found joy and have found love and have led good lives for a long time, even if from the outside it didn't look like it.
Right. And I think like, mainstream heterosexual white culture wants the world to believe that these stories can only end unhappily, which is just all part of that agenda. You know what I mean? And it's like, we give authors voices who can push back against that, and then read them and then amplify them, so that, we can kind of challenge that narrative. But speaking about third act breakups, I learned the hard way that you don't have to have a third act breakup, because I wrote a third act breakup, and by the time the book came out, I'm like, this book didn't need a third act breakup, but it was too late. It was already out in the market. So I was like, all right, I've learned my lesson. And, and I've been doing this a really long time. So like, you never stop growing and changing as an author, because things and then in my most recent book, I had what I called like a gray moment instead, because it was like, But it wasn't like, the tempest of like slammed doors and tears and things like that. It was more just kind of like people dealing with their emotions and stuff like that. And it's like, yeah, like I said, I've been doing this for a really long time. My first book came out as Zoe Archer in like 2006. So it's been a while. And I'm still figuring this out, which is kind of shocking because I've written like 35 or 36 books that have been published. So I'm like, wow. So you can always
Does that
grow.
mean there's more? You have secret books?
Yeah, well, there's, under the bed
Send them to
manuscripts
me.
and stuff like that, and things I started and never finished. I think that's pretty common, but a
Yeah.
lot of my stuff is made, fortunately. But there's quite a few things, including the very first book I wrote that got me an agent that will never see the light of day. I don't even know where I wrote it on like a word processor at the end of the 90s. So where that is, God only knows.
That's amazing.
But I got you an agent, so
It did get me an agent. So, it was a stepping stone. So, you might not get your, if people who are aspiring or watching this, you might not get your first book published or even your second, but maybe your third. And you're going to mess it up, and you'll still keep going.
And 30 books in, you'll still learn something new about what you're writing and how you want to write it.
Exactly. Absolutely. And your process is going to change, because mine certainly has. I mean, I'm not, it's been like, I started writing romance, I think, in the 80s, actually, pretty soon after I started reading it. But as a professional author, I started writing in the 90s. And so it's been a long time, a lot of evolution. Definitely not the same person I was in so many ways.
Do you find that that's reflected in the books too? I imagine that it would seep in when you change the books.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, definitely, like when I wrote like Waiting for a Scot Like You, it's like I was in my 40s at that time, and I wouldn't have tried to attempt writing a character like that until I'd kind of known what it was like to be a woman aging, and what that experience was like. So it reflects on that and what I've learned about relationships and my own journey and interpersonal relationships and stuff like that, and processing, because I get to work out all of my inner demons on the page and stuff like that. That's fun. That's fun for you, the reader. I'm sure somebody could psychoanalyze me by reading my books, but please don't. And if you do, don't text me or email me or DM me, because I have a therapist. I'm good. Thanks.
Be like, today I learned about Eva Leigh.
Right.
Oh, that's funny.
But there's an editor in there, I'm sure, that some of those things get tweaked so they're not so directly like,
well, yeah,
direct line. So
sure.
Some of it's just the character.
Right, exactly. Sometimes a cheroot is just a cheroot.
But
I was curious. There were a lot of interesting side characters in this story, especially for a story that wasn't super long. And one of my favorites was her dancing master boss. I just really, what a great guy he was. I would love to see him get a story.
Right. Yeah, he was
really
I liked how rounded he was, you know what I mean? And that he didn't fall into preconceived ideas as to what this character was going to be. He's not even like the sassy gay friend. He's, we're going to put him into like stereotypical boxes. It's like he defied all those expectations, which I really enjoyed.
Me too. I think when we first met him, I was like, oh, here's a guy who's going to try to take advantage of her. And then he wasn't, but then he also wasn't like any kind of like rival or any, like there was nothing that that was what I would have expected on first sight. And I think when you read a lot, and probably when you write too, like you start learning like the rhythms of things, and so it's really easy to like at first glance, which is super annoying to my husband when we're watching a movie, or if we're, where I'm like, oh, I see where this is going. It's nice to be wrong. It's nice to like be surprised.
Yeah, we've actually been watching a bunch of Star Trek Strange New Worlds, and like my husband is Nico Rosa, who's also a romance author. He's an author and he has written romance, and he's been writing for decades, and we'll be watching it, and it's an enjoyable show, but like we see stuff coming, because we've been doing this a long time and you're familiar with narrative. And so you're like, oh, they're infected, or like they're not going to make it. I mean, so it's kind of like we already, like, you can see these things coming. And so when you get your expectations defied, you're always like, oh, well, all right, good job.
Yeah. I guess that's also like when you're like, oh, well, they can't kill that character. And then they do. It's like, it's a shock.
Right.
I let myself love them.
Yeah.
Well, this is why I like
romance.
This is like, that's exactly it, Megan, because that's like, this is why I read romance, because I'm tired of characters I care about getting killed off. I've seen it too many times. So that doesn't really, that very seldom happens in romance. And I appreciate that, because in life, people we care about don't make it.
Yeah.
And it's really nice to find a place where that doesn't happen.
I agree.
I
wanted to ask you, you already mentioned that like in your stories, sometimes you also have like found families and different, things that we can find in Sixpenny Octavo. But I was curious what you liked best about the way that Lucy develops her own found family in the story. So we started, she's very insular.
Well, she kind of does it, and it's not just through Hannah, which I liked. She did a lot of this work on her own. And the funny thing is, like, Hannah's kind of prickly, so it wouldn't be like Hannah's going to be like, and now here's all of these warm and lovely people, as warm and lovely as I am. Like, Hannah's a lovely character, but she's not like the most open. So I really, and that Lucy's efforts, like the fact that she her sort of impetus to change her life doesn't necessarily, the generative point isn't necessarily Hannah. Like, Hannah becomes a complement to that, but like learning to read and then playing the fiddle and like changing her and then coming up with these ideas for advertising for, not for like the reading club and also for the dancing master. It's like all of these things are kind of on her own, and then Hannah becomes part of the enrichment of her life, which I really like that about her. And she kind of learns on her own how to become part of a greater community, which is, it's a beautiful thing for a person to give themselves, all of those things.
I agree. It also is really nice to see it in such a well-rounded way. I think that sometimes we like to like put, I think it's Sarah McLean that says that, like put characters in like a phone booth and kind of watch them do their thing. But I really found it refreshing to have lots of side characters and characters who, or love interests who had also their own interests and their own kind of life going on outside of the relationship with each other. I really enjoyed that as well. And I thought that the Annick did a good job of like fitting all that in a book that wasn't, like it's not like it's developed over a series. It's within that one story. You get to see the whole group kind of grow together, which was really nice.
Right. Yeah. And you don't have to, and you can care about somebody even if they're not sequel bait. You know what I mean? They're just as developed, even if you know that we're not going to see them get their own romance. So, which is, I mean, I feel the impulse, because I'm like, what about them? What about them? What about them? But they're like, it's all part of this ensemble, which is really, and done in a very, like we've been talking about, the book's not very long, but within there's a lot of economy of words and scenes so that we get what we need out of each character and each moment with them.
Excuse me. So I guess I want to ask you about what you're working on now, if you want to talk about that at all, what you have coming out next.
Well, I'm in a transitional phase right now, so we've got some things in the works. I hope some good news will be coming. I'm trying some new paths and new avenues. The publishing is kind of it's a very tumultuous place right now. So the thing that you have to bear in mind when you want longevity in a career is being adaptable and nimble, and also resilient, because there's so many opportunities for you to feel like you can't do this. And when setbacks happen, you have to be like, okay, you can feel your feelings, and then you kind of get up and then get back to it. And that's definitely part of, as I said, I've been doing this for a really long time, and it's still part of what, I've been, and like a lot of my friends have been in the game as long as I have. And we all talk and we're like, we got to keep growing and changing and evolving and getting back up. That's definitely part of it. So that's kind of, but I have a lot of projects and things that I'm working on. So I'm just going to kind of keep moving forward. Yeah. And that's kind of where I'm at right now.
So basically, I guess people need to follow, like I would follow you on Instagram, or like if you have a newsletter, then we can find out when all the secret projects.
Yes, exactly.
Like public projects.
Yes, I am on Instagram, and if you go to my bio link, it's got the link to my newsletter, and that's where I keep everyone posted as to what's going on. And as soon as things develop, I will definitely let everybody know. So definitely keep following me there. And I bake a lot, and I take pictures of my cats. So those are always exciting. I mean, everyone knows that.
Through this social media is that you and oh shoot, who was it? It's another historical romance. Carolyn Linden sometimes mail cookies to each other, and I'm extremely jealous of this situation. I baked.
That's so fun.
Yeah,
we cookie swap.
Life events kind of interrupted that, but I would like to. So Carolyn, if you're watching, I want to send you some cookies, because I'm the current bearer of the cookie tub that's going back and forth, and so the volley landed in my court, and now I need to send her some cookies. So, and also the temperature has gone down, so you can't send cookies in the summertime because it's just a disaster.
Yeah. Well, we'll be looking forward to new cookies on the
yes, I love seeing people's bakes and everything. I think that's so fun. Like I'm only a very occasional baker, and so I love seeing bread and cookies and cakes and everything. I think it's so fun.
Well, and my husband Nico, he is also a bread baker, so he does a lot of bread baking. And after we got back from Japan, we had lots of projects in mind, because we got to experience a lot of like Japanese baking and food and stuff like that. So you'll be seeing more of that on his, and he's on Instagram as well. He's a Nico Rosso on Instagram, so you can look him up and see all of his art projects and his baking projects, because there's always something coming out of our workshop, as he calls it.
That's fun. Awesome.
Thank you so much again for doing this. We really appreciate you.
Well, thank you for hosting me, and for reading the book and sharing the book with your followers. It's I'm always so happy to, and I also want to thank Olivia Waite for suggesting the book, because I it wouldn't have been on my radar, and I'm glad that she was able to direct me in this way, because it was a nice place to be for a little while.
Yeah, it was. I do think that with indie like published books, sometimes there's so many that it's nice if you find something that that you want other people to to spread the word, because it sometimes feels like it's hard to discover those little gems.
Yeah, discoverability, I think, is probably for any author, but especially indie authors, I think it's very challenging. So, we do what we can to kind of bring attention to people so that we can, explore their backlist and support their front list.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thanks, everybody. Guys. I really appreciate it. And I hope you guys have a great rest of your day.
You too.
Okay. Bye.